Hello friends, welcome to Salesforce CMIT's video session 186. So basically in today's video, we will discuss about what are the limitations which we have when we explore, different datasets with a single query. In the last video, due to some, issues which I was facing in the recipe while creating the dataset, I think it took a lot of time just to explain you how we can explore multiple dataset in a single query. But anyways, in today's video, I will just explain the limitations which I could have covered in the last video, but not an issue. Can be a short video. So yeah, let's quickly get back into it. So firstly, on Google, you will just search with this. I searched earlier, so that's why it's displaying over here, exploring multiple datasets with a single query. Okay, just search this on Google and just open this first Salesforce document which you have from Salesforce. Okay, now once you open this, as you can see, basically it gives you the method of how you can open the analytics studio, how you can add the data set. Okay, so that method, the blend part is something which is important, which I will explain you probably in the next video. And in this video maybe I can just give you a hint of it. But yeah, straight away we can now jump back to this one where we can see the limitations. Now the last video I already showed you how we can add up to 6 data set. Now when I say 6 data set, basically you have to keep this in mind that it's not that only calculate if the complexity arises where you have to deal with more than 6 dataset, then that can be done. That if you just go to SQL mode, you can actually easily add the dataset. I will actually teach you that part once I go to that SQL topic. But for now, from the configuration aspect, you can only add 6 dataset. Okay, just keep that in mind. We can add further dataset if we go to the SQL mode. That topic we will cover separately when we come to the SQL part. Okay, now the next part which is written is add all dataset before beginning to explore them. The add dataset control is visible when you add groupings, measure, or filters. Now, what this means is basically, let's say if I go to the Analytics Studio and if I open this dataset recipe account, now as you can see, this is enabled for you. Okay, right now I will be able to add any new dataset over here. Now, what it is saying is if I kind of like, if basically if I add any groupings or measures or filters. So, for example, let's say I add a particular group over here. I think it's still loading. That's strange. Why? I don't know why it's still loading. Let's maybe refresh it once again. Okay, fine. Now let's see if I add this industry over here. Okay. Now if you see when I add industry, this particular button got disabled. Okay, immediately when I add a grouping, that is the industry part. Okay. Now if I undo this, now again, let's say this is enabled for you. Again, if I add something else, let's say if I add something like, for example, unique of industry. Okay, not unique of industry. Let's say if I add. Okay, in this case, it's still being there. I think the bar, I mean, this is mostly related to that bars. So if you add anything related to groupings, definitely that will get disabled. Okay, now coming back, let's see what else is there. What I will do is very quickly, maybe I can also do one thing just to confirm. I can add a measure. Okay, very quickly, I will add a measure for account just to see if on adding the measure something happens or not. Okay, because I am also not completely sure on that part. So we can definitely test it very quickly. Okay, so we will open this free session 24 hour latest recipe. And very quickly from the account, I will just add this one, which is, yeah, we'll just add this annual revenue over there. Okay, so that being added, let me click on save and run. And let's very quickly check the monitor screen once. Okay, I think it took around 2 hours, to run this opportunity sim. I think there is definitely some kind of issue, but anyways, not an issue right now. Okay, so this one is running. Let this run. Now let's quickly check the other parts. So basically, it is saying groupings and filters. So let's check the filters right now. So you can see it's enabled for you. Let's say if I add any filter, for example, industry equal to agriculture. Okay. Now still I see it's been there. Okay, so this part is still there on the filter. So I think only for the groupings it gets applied. Where if you add any filter, you won't be able to add another things. Okay. So let's say I remove this kind of right now. And maybe what I can do is, let's me see if I add something, any filter over here, if that impacts it. Okay, so I think the filter which they are talking about is when you apply on the measure part. Okay, so on the measure part, if you apply any filter, you actually see that actually it's getting disabled over here. Not the complete filter we are talking about, but it's basically on the bar length. If you add this filter on the measure level, okay, so that's the thing, and we will check that measure part once I have that field over there, the annual revenue. You can add a data set only once. So basically, like, you can add a data set only once. So you can just completely keep on adding the data set instead of going for measures and all. So that part can be done. Okay. These features are available: drill and focus, value stable video. Okay. So what happens is, like, for example, let's say I again refresh this to get back to the original view. And in the meantime, let me cross check if this runs successfully. Okay, this is still running, which is fine. So what happens is, like, as soon as I go into my values table, right? So on the values table, you see this got disabled. So that is what it's saying over here. Like, once you go to the values table and you have this windowing functioning. So basically, let's say I go to this compare table, and let's say I click on the edit this column. Fine. And okay, I need one more column. So maybe I can go for the count of those once again. And here, let's say I click on edit this column, and let's say I go for the window. It's not happening. Okay, okay. I think maybe I have to apply this one. Now let's check. Yeah. So anyhow, once we add the grouping, anyhow, that won't be applicable. So that is what it's saying. Like, basically the values table, windowing, and time series function, these features won't be available. The totals and subtotals also. Okay. So yeah, this is something which we can definitely check very quickly. So let's say refresh this once again. Now, when I come to the compare table, right now, as you can see, this is still enabled for you, right? So that one is still enabled. Now let's say if I, okay, let's say if I go for show totals, okay, for show totals is still there, but I think once I go for grouping, okay, now I have the sum. Okay, let's see very quickly how this, if this changes or not, if we go for a measure. Okay, that part we can quickly cross check. So I have the count of rows, I have the sum of annual revenue. Okay, it is still there. So maybe for measure, I'm not sure of what is being meant over there. But definitely, if you add any filter on this, you definitely know that that is going to get disabled. So if I click on add a filter and I click on, like, let's say billing country equal to Australia, then as you can see, this is definitely getting disabled. Okay. And similarly, if you go to compare table, let's say I go for sum of annual revenue. In this case, the total won't make sense because I have to anyhow group by. And the problem is, if I go for groupings, anyhow that will disable, right? So that's the thing. So even if I go for show totals, that will not matter. Okay. But anyways, I do understand what they're trying to say. So basically, like, if you are going for the totals and subtotals, because total subtotals you go for groupings and all, that won't be applicable. Okay. And then you have this natural language queries. Maybe we can walk through one of the sessions. So what does that mean? Faceting applies only to primary dataset when we blend data from multiple datasets. So this concept called broadcasting and faceting, okay, we will actually. So what happens is, like, facing out only to primary dataset when you blend data from. Okay, so what happens is, like, let's say again if I refresh this one, and let's say I add a few data resources. Let's say I add recipe keys. Okay. Now let's say I went for a left blend, and let's say I select something like account ID, and over here also I select something like account ID. Okay. So what happens is, like, on the dashboard, when we have this concept of broadcasting and faceting, you will mainly see that it's been faceting the primary data set that is from the account one, which is coming up. Okay, so let's say I take something like contact, for example. So let's say I remove this data set, and let's say I select something like contact. Okay, and now if I go for something like account ID, and here if I go for something like account ID as well. Fine. So some faceting, there's a concept of broadcasting and facility. Maybe I can revisit this one once I explain you that. But that's what it's saying. Basically, the faceting will apply only on the primary dataset, the first dataset which you are taking part in. Okay. Record level actions work only with the primary dataset. So record level actions means basically if there is some restrictions which you want to do from on the record level. So basically those kind of record level actions will only work with the primary data set. Fine. So let's say I go for this configure actions. Okay. So anyways, it will configure actions and all, like this will only work for the primary one which we have. Fine. Let's say I go for compare table over here. Okay. Let's say I go for open Salesforce report. Let me click on that. Now, as you can see, like basically from the primary data set, basically some of the action level records can be performed, and that is what it's being meant over here. Okay. So that's the whole thing about the limitation. So firstly, definitely you have to remember you can only have, you can blend up till 6 data set. Fine. So for example, as I showed you earlier, like let's say I go for recipe contact, let's say I go for recipe case, I go for recipe lead, I go for recipe product, I go for recipe user. Okay. And finally it's disappeared. Now, if I go to SQL query, I can actually add more because of course I have been working in the CRM and there has been use cases that I have to deal with several data sets as well. In that case, of course, things can be on SQL. That will be a separate topic, how that query mode is, what that SQL is all about. But from the configuration aspect, like just by manual point and click, you have to remember it can be up till 6 data set. Okay. That's the thing. Uh, Add all data set. So basically this add all data set disable when you basically this groupings part we all understood, and this filters also, like when we adding on the measure, we definitely understand that that's getting disabled. Okay. What I can do is maybe very quickly I can check on the compare table if somehow somehow it will get disabled or not. So let's say I go for, okay. Yeah, so basically I think it's more about the groupings and where the filters which you add on the measure. You can add a data set only once. Fine. Like at one go you can add all the data set, which is fine. And this values table, uh, maybe you can further up this deal of course, but this values table, like when you're going for values table, okay, so basically in chart mode you can add further data set if you want. That disable, I mean that add data source option will be there, but as soon as you go to values table, it will get disappeared. Now it will happen even in pivot table, you can still add. Okay, in the pivot table and compare table you can still add, but in values table you won't be able to add. And definitely all these functions, because anyhow we have to bring the grouping in these functions. Okay, so that way it will not work, like here is already mentioned. And whatever faceting you are doing, that will be applied on the primary data set, and the record level actions which I showed you, that can only work with the primary data set. Okay, now this is all about the limitations which we have. Okay, and in the next topic we will cover a bit on the blend part. So basically when you click on add data source, and let's say I add the recipe contact, you have this blend. Okay, so if you see, like what is the, like this concept called choose data set relationship, where you see there's a particular relationship which we have to select to control which records are part of the blended data for this query. Note for left and right means the initial data set of blend is considered the left one. So for left and right, like the initial, the first one which you select, that is considered the left one, and this is how it goes about. Now we will understand each of them, though there's a video also which I have, where I introduced to the concept of joins. You have to refer that video because there will be a file which will be taken into consideration to explain this part. And yeah, this part we can do in the next session. So I hope you understand what are the limitations which we have when we are exploring multiple data set in a single query. So that's it. It was an easy one. And yeah, sometimes question get asked like through configuration aspect, what is the limitation, how much you can blend the data set, when that options get disabled, like when you add groupings, when you add filter on the measure sections. Okay, and when you go to the values table, it definitely gets disabled. So yeah, these are some of the things which you definitely have to keep in mind. And yeah, that's it about this video. Let's meet very soon in our next video, where we will understand about the blend, relationship blend, the left blend, right blend, inner blend, and outer blend. And yeah, I will help you to understand by doing a side by side comparison with the joint concept which we learned in our initial section. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.